Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the DJI Cinebot25 V2. We really can't see any of the components, but the USB port for the flight controller is right back here. It is the Taker F722. It is a 35 amp, 32-bit, all-in-one flight controller. The motors are Speedix X2 1404 4600 kV. And on those motors are HQ D63 tri-bladed V2 props. Of course, the video system I have in this one is the DJI 4 Pro, but check the product listing for other possible varieties available. The whole assembly, the camera and the VTX, is soft mounted inside this cage. The cage can be removed by removing those two screws and these two screws, and then the whole cage just lifts right out. The GPS is the DJI M10 Nano, and it is inside this plastic protective case. Receiver is an Express LS receiver. We have our T-style antenna right here. Battery is the XT30. Big DJI has upgraded their battery mat because this is way stickier than I remember on the last quad. Some batteries won't fit this way, but you can remove the screws from these metal brackets and then rotate everything to run this way and have a much larger battery that runs across the quad. It does come with a blue LED all around the protective frame, and inside these little clear windows we can see our all-in-one flight controller lights. Most of this cage is metal, these pieces up here. But the pieces that hold our antenna, they are plastic. It does come with an extra set of props. It also comes with this antenna mount. I believe that's an antenna mount. We get an extra battery strap as well as some extra screws and rubber dampeners inside this package. We get an extra top protective plate, this one up here, as well as a couple extra antennas. Not sure why, because I believe these are identical. And we have some more mounting pieces that go down around along our VTX. As one of the major features, it does have GPS, so we have some information on GPS rescue mode and beta flight. We also have this quick start guide that is color printed. We also include some additional information and support information here within these pamphlets, and we get one sheet of stickers. We are going to start off with my very first flight. This is a flight that is going to be the smooth sort of cinematic or filming type of flight style. Do note the red dot, that is our recording, and I start that fairly quickly after powering it on. You can see as that clock runs by, and in the upper right section we have our number of satellites, even though I armed before GPS rescue was available. I believe it's 7 or 8 satellites that we need before GPS rescue. We don't get that warning, not to mention that you could always have your latitude and longitude on screen, and then if you were to go down, you could use that latitude and longitude information to go rescue that yourself without having to have the need of GPS rescue. But of course, if you go down, that's one thing, but versus if you get lost, and using GPS rescue has a much different function that if you're lost, it will be much more helpful. And this is in kind of a worst case scenario. The winds are pretty high, and that's why we're starting out here with our native camera view, our in-goggle view. No stabilization here. This is just native in the goggle DVR footage, and it's 18 to 29 miles an hour on the wind, and it's 43 degrees. Next flight I'll show you is on a cooler day, but it's much more ideal as far as the wind goes. When it comes to these quads that are prop protected, the wind has a much greater impact. We also have the vertical structure that the wind can grab that you just don't have on open prop sorts of quads. If you didn't notice it, we've got kind of side plates almost built into this prop protection, as well as the vertical structure where our VTX and camera are mounted up with that soft mounting built in. So when you have crosswinds, they can have an impact. But even at these winds, and you may be able to pick it up on my flight audio camera that's sitting on the table right in front of us as we pass by the pool where I'm sitting, that you can hear the wind from time to time. It actually got worse as the day went on. We got winds up in the mid-30s, so that when I went back out to fly it again, it was pretty consistent in the dust area as far as what the Weather Underground does report at this time frame. So I wanted to make sure I showed you this, and we've transitioned already over into our Rocksteady footage. This is where the DJI video system does its own thing when it comes to video stabilization, so it zooms in a bit in order to be able to smooth everything out. I want to start out with this scenario because when you're out flying these particular ones, you don't need to think that it's going to handle all wind the same. Of course, the less wind when it comes to our hobby, the the better off we are. If you're a professional filmer, it's probably even more important to know what the tolerances or what sort of video you get out of these quads when the wind is high, because you may be forced to film in high winds. I don't know. I don't do that stuff. So you guys tell me that are out there taking contracts for doing filming, and if you have to film in high wind, or if they try to find you a day where the winds might be a little bit less. And we do my favorite pass here along the fence line. That's one of the things that I always enjoy. Let's jump into a more ideal situation where the winds are much less. You can see we've already armed. This is a different day. It says rescue off, and we only have 3 satellites. My very first flight, we didn't take a look at the end, but I can report to you that I had 11, sometimes 12. It was bouncing back and forth near the end of the flight. As far as flight times go, on the 960 that they sent with this quad, that was sent by GEP-RC. Oddly enough, it wasn't GEP-RC branded, so that's a different brand that I'm aware of. I got 8 minutes and 45 seconds of this slow, cruisy flight on a 850, which is the Beta FPV battery that I showed you. I got 8 minutes of flight time on that. And on a 650, which I'll use in my more freestyle flight coming up, I got 5 minutes on average. I did fly 2 batteries on all of them where I had 2 batteries. As far as this one that GEP-RC sent, the Bosili ED branded battery, I only had the one of them. So that flight time that reported of 8 minutes and 45 seconds, that could be more or less depending upon, you know, the battery that you get, or if you can buy these from GEP-RC. So that's the flight time that I have to report. And of course, again, in this much more ideal situation where the winds are only 7 to 9 miles an hour, which is pretty minimal for my area. Of course, as I always say, we have some wind protection with the houses, not much with the trees right now with no leaves, but we still aren't feeling the full brunt of that. I have had people say, well, get a wind meter, get this, get that. Got to keep in mind, guys, this is just a hobby for me. This isn't my livelihood, and this is a domestic house, so I can't be putting all sorts of permanent structures out there. I guess I could put some sort of mobile wind and temperature meter right there on the table, but again, that doesn't tell us anything about up in the air. It doesn't tell us anything about out further away from me during the fence line. So the wind variables, yeah, I get what I report, and it could be more accurate, but this is, you know, a hobby of mine. I love to fly. I love to make the videos and interact with everybody in the comment section in the FPV community. But planting stuff in the yard in order to get more statistical information about our flights probably isn't going to happen, because I've had that suggested for many, many years, and it's a domestic house. You know, my kids play out here. We have people that come over, you know, the pool parties that our youngest has a couple of times a year. I just think putting those things out is going to pull away from our enjoyment of the yard, so it's probably not something that I'm going to do. But let's move on into my freestyle flight. As we get started here, you can see we got 20-ish seconds on the recording. My storage is full on board, but we have 7 satellites. And it is still, I armed right as it said 7. I think 7 is what you have to have for GPS rescue. But you can see in pretty quick order that we got up to 7 on that GPS. I did have on my first day flying out on other batteries, I did see that I had almost 11 before arming on a couple of those occasions. So this one, I report this oftentimes because I believe this is an important feature when it comes to those of you that are wanting GPS or use it for some particular purpose. You want to know how long it's got to sit there. This one pulls in GPS satellites pretty quick compared to other quads that I've had on the channel. So that has something to do with either their satellite. There is a variable within the day. I've seen the same quad, like in this case, pull in satellites sometimes quicker. Normally it stores your satellites, so you should get them faster, especially if you don't spend a whole lot of time unplugged from battery to battery across the quad. That's, you know, I don't use GPS quads all the time, but that's something that I have learned from others that have come to the channel, as well as my own flight experiences, that if you stay outside and you just go from battery to battery relatively quickly, that the storage for the GPS information and the satellites that you'll show on screen come up pretty quickly. And if you like wait a day, it may take some time, but in this case, not very long at all. You know, 30 seconds and we had almost 7 satellites. That 30 seconds, there is a short power up time before I start the recording, of course. So maybe 10 or 15 seconds more than what I'm actually recording there. So the freestyle flight, of course, this isn't what it's made for, but I always test these things out to make sure you get an idea if you want to, whether you're just learning to fly and you want a prop protected quad so it's safe. that you have an idea of what it's capable of, at least in my space, in my hands. What things you can expect to do with it. Maybe you need to use some of these maneuvers when you're out filming. I don't know. Again, not something I do, but I want to show you as much as I'm capable of showing you. So when it comes down to your interest, and if you're interested in obtaining something like this or this particular one, you have a real good idea of what to expect, because I don't want to omit something or not test something just because it's not what it's designed for. One of the things that we tend to see with these is when I do punch outs and I'm kind of hanging in the air, nose down or camera down, that we oftentimes see a little yaw wobble. I don't see it nearly as much in this one, but when I do quicker go to the nose down position after punching up, that I did hear the motors kind of spin up. But again, you can listen to that stuff and kind of make a diagnosis yourself. I didn't see a flight deficiency in that, so that seems to be an improvement they've made. I've seen that on a number of quads to where you do a vertical punch and then you nose over real quick and it kind of shakes when it's zero throttle. But that was a flight on a 650 milliamp battery. I like to use smaller batteries within my space when I'm flying these things more aggressively. And you see we still had seven satellites throughout the flight. Flight time of 2 minutes and 51 seconds. Could have gone a touch longer as our battery recovers to almost 3.6 volts per cell. The construction of this quad does feel pretty good, feels solid. Of course, I always like to try to test the prop protection, and this is pretty solid, especially when it comes to straight on. You know, you can bend it, as you can see here with my hands this way. It'll bend a little bit that way. We have some pretty big pieces coming out the front, so that does keep it from, you know, bending much more of outside of this region. But when it comes to just kind of squeezing it or pushing on it this way, I can get it to hit the prop, as you can kind of hear there and see the prop move when I get it just right. So you won't have a lot of damage to your props, I think, unless you're going fast and you hit something really hard. But you could have damage, but you do have a second set of props you can go to, and of course you can buy others. I think one of the features that they kind of highlight with this is this removable module. Call it a module up here, to where, like I said in the quick specs, you remove those two screws and then these two screws. And of course, you disconnect the cable connector from your VTX, and you could pull this out and put it on another quad. I presume GepRC either has others that are larger than this. Remember, I just do micros that you could move this to, or they're coming out with those in the future. Of course, when it comes to things coming out, will they actually do it or not? I presume so, but we only know until we know. I mentioned it when we were in flying, how these have more surface area that the wind can push against, not just the prop protection and this vertical mounting piece for our VTX and camera, but we also have in this area a lot of flat structure where the prop protection is molded all together and it comes up in here. The nice thing about that is if you get debris or you go down in grass or something, you won't be putting debris down in there. And because it is protected here, there isn't much of a risk that you would get grass or dew on your all-in-one flight controller if you were to launch from grass. I wouldn't suggest that because we have inverted downward-facing motors and props. This area is an area where you could potentially get a little bit of water from dewy grass, so you'd still want to be careful, but at least your all-in-one flight controller, the brains, the sensitive part, so to speak, that would oftentimes short when you're in dewy grass or even wet grass, that is covered and protected by this. Something I didn't highlight in the quick specs that we'll take a look at now is GepRC has long used these protective sheaths that are sticky. I would still wrap those in either electrical tape or my favorite motor wire tape, which is kind of an acetate tape. I do link that in all the video descriptions down below. You can get it from Amazon. You can probably find it on AliExpress and various other websites. But I would wrap that with some tape because I think over time these will come off. And you know, I want something to go around the carbon fiber. I know it kind of messes up the look as far as the silk screening on the top arms, but it just gives me a little extra sense of security that those motor wires are going to stay up there. I don't know exactly how much motor wire goes up in there, so I don't think it would come out because, again, it goes all the way up, so it doesn't have a lot of space. But if this were to come loose and hang down and potentially, you know, if we didn't notice over time, it start to sink a little bit, then, you know, it could get in the prop line and cut a motor wire or pull it right off of the ESC pads, which we don't want to happen. So, you know, it's a minor thing, but it's something that I have to suggest because I would do it. So I'll suggest it to use some of that tape and just wrap it up. You can use electrical tape. Some people just use that just fine. I prefer that acetate tape. I do like that they have the XT30 mounted down here. It does limit the length of battery you can use when it's in this orientation, but it does make sure that your battery lead will be secured. You don't have to worry about zip tying the battery lead that goes down to the flight controller. It's already secured into the top plate, so that's kind of covered. This rear mount, GepRC really doesn't use much in terms of 3D printed parts. They usually use plastic molds of some sort, and you can see that this is flexible, which is probably a good thing. So if you go down through a tree or brush, this stuff should move around and hopefully won't be the point you get hung up. You'll probably get hung up with branches in these areas before this would hang up, but at least this won't get torn off because it's firm. It should flex for you enough that your chances of this being something that gets torn off or the reason why you get hung up in a tree, it's minimized because it's not firm. I showed it in the quick specs, but this whole assembly, and you can see it from the top part as I move the camera here, that the whole thing is on rubber mounts inside here and inside the camera housing. So the camera does have some vibration dampening that it can do independent of the quad itself. And you can also see that that dampening is independent of the metal housing that it's inside. That's just part of their engineering and their design here. So that is something that I think will help, especially those that might be filming. And you saw the footage. I think it also helped in those high wind scenarios, especially when on descents. Descents with these can be kind of rough from time to time when you're in high wind, and this will help to minimize the vibration that you see in your footage when filming. We do have this protective hood, which you can adjust with these screws on either side, so you can move that up or down. This is the camera angle that I was running on the Freestyle-ish flight, I call it. And you do have a touch more. If you see back here, there's a little bit of space behind the screw, so we could go up even a little bit more on that. I haven't maxed that out on that particular flight. And just to make sure I'm hitting it strongly, so they recommend batteries between, it was 700 milliamp and 1100 milliamp. Of course, to run batteries that don't fit in this way, we just remove the screws from these metal posts. We turn them to where you can mount them this way. I would take the strap side that connects down here and have it up this way, and then you can run your battery lengthwise. You can run a larger battery crosswise, and that should work out fine. We don't see too much battery sensitivity when it comes to your mounting with the advancements of Betaflight and our flight controllers. Usually it works out just normally, although I will admit I did not test going to that other orientation. I mentioned it in the quick specs, but I was impressed with how sticky this was. Let me put a battery on here just to kind of give you some idea. Of course, it's a little bit dirty because I've had a few batteries on there. So I'm going to press this battery on, and then I'm holding it with just the battery and giving it a little shake. Eventually it did come off. I could probably improve that. I'll just lick my finger here and clean it just a touch. Blow on it to get it to dry. See if we can get a second test. I'm just curious about this. I was impressed with how sticky it was out of the box, and pulling my batteries off of it the first 6, 8, 10 flights, whatever it was. Yep, I didn't get it let dry enough, but you saw the initial one. It's pretty sticky, and I think that's an improvement, specifically when it comes to protecting from a battery ejection. If you get a stickier pad down here, it tends to keep our battery in place in the most violent of crashes. Of course, if your battery strap goes AWOL, then we're just dependent upon that sticky battery pad, but for the most part, I think that's an improvement compared to what I've seen in the past. I don't have any problems with construction. You can see all the screws are right out there for us to see. These are kind of embedded a little bit, but they're all hex screws. I don't have a problem with any of that. If you needed to get to your all-in-one flight controller, or you needed to get under here, we do have a fair number of screws that we would have to unscrew in order to get to that. Say you wanted to change out this cob light to something else, some other color, something like that. We do have access to our USB port for our VTX, as well as our bind button and our SD card for the top. It's plain and simple. It's available. We also have the camera angle adjustments. We've also been over that. And the top plate adjusts. The antenna mounts that they do remove, I think they include extras of those in the box as well for additional antennas. So if you clip those and you break them off, you have extras in the box. GPS is plastic protected. It's only plastic, but at the very least there's something there. If you have your battery up here, you'd have to have something that came directly down in that area and just smashed against that to do any damage. And it didn't seem to cause any issues as far as getting satellites. The satellites came in, as I showed you, pretty quickly on each flight. Sometimes a little faster than others on different days, but that's better than I've seen in other quads. As I record this, GepRC has not published the product page. I would presume this is going to be somewhere in the $400 and some odd price range, but you could put your guess below. And when I do have a link to it, I will link that down in the video description for your ease. Otherwise, you just use your Google foo, type GepRC Cinebot25 V2, and that should turn up the product page and wherever it's available, and you can check it out if you are interested. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.